Joining us live here this morning on NewsNow from Fox, once again, is Brandon Arnold. He is a VP at the National Taxpayers Union. Mr. Arnold, thank you so much for joining our show yet again. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great. Thanks a lot.
All right, so we wanted to talk about, we've obviously been talking about it this morning already, proposed hike in taxes, in particular for infrastructure. We are hearing that President Joe Biden is reportedly planning the first major tax hike since 1993 in the next economic package. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, this is pretty concerning. Right now, we still have a struggling economy. We're trying to get out of this pandemic rut. We're making a lot of progress, and I think there's cause for optimism. But the way to reverse this quickly is by imposing a massive tax increase on individuals, on job creators, on businesses. And that's exactly what Biden is talking about here. This tax increase would be in the magnitude of about $2 trillion based on the initial information that we have. And details are still sketchy, of course, as this thing comes together and as we have time to crunch the numbers and figure out the exact impact. But you look at just the corporate tax hike that he's proposing, going from 21%, which is the rate that we were able to lower the tax code to back in 2017, bumping that all the way up to 28%. Just that piece of the puzzle alone would kill 160,000 jobs. So we're talking about having significant impacts, again, at the most inopportune of times when our economy is still struggling and trying to get back to where it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are used to or familiar with the idea that Democrats support more taxes and Republicans are anti-taxes, anti-government. So do you think voters knew this could happen during election?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think Biden really shied away from the tax increase card. He played that regularly, not maybe as much as some of his primary competition did, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They were talking about wealth taxes and financial transaction taxes and all sorts of horrible policies. Biden has been focused more on wealthier taxpayers, of course, focusing on people $400,000 and above. We'll see if that plays out. Obama infamously made the pledge that he wouldn't raise taxes on people who make less than $250,000 and certainly violated that with higher tobacco taxes, with Obamacare, which had roughly $1 trillion in taxes. It's funny when we talk about the first major tax increase since 1993. There have been pretty substantial tax increases since then. But Joe Biden, if he's able to get this bill passed, this proposal passed, would take the cake because we'll be talking about a huge, huge tax increase. Like I said, roughly $2 trillion. That's absolutely enormous and coming at one of the worst times we could possibly raise taxes.
I think it'd be really hard for any American to deny that our country has out of control debt, right? We've passed now 3 coronavirus response bills. Everyone's saying we're kicking the can down the road. Future generations are going to pay back this debt. So we're talking about, it now exceeds $28 trillion. 2 of that trillion nearly just came from the last coronavirus relief package. The debt associated is expected to shrink the economy next year, according to Penn Wharton, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They modeled the $1.9 trillion in spending that just came out of this Biden COVID package. And they said that we'll get a little bit of a boost in 2021. But because there's so much debt associated with this borrowing, there's so many costs associated with that debt, that it's actually going to shrink the economy. And meanwhile, when you look at our debt to GDP ratio, the amount of money we borrowed compared to the size of our economy, we're getting in the same territory as some of the worst economies in Europe, like Greece and Italy, countries that have really mismanaged their finances over the year. Now, I get it. We had to fight this pandemic. We had to push more money out the door to make sure businesses could stay afloat and workers could pay their mortgage and their rent and their utility bills. But I think we went way overboard with that $1.9 trillion package. And we are going to see, once interest rates increase, once this debt continues to snowball, we're going to see real repercussions for the economy in terms of fewer jobs, lower wages, and that's quite unfortunate.
I want to ask you, just so our viewers can understand, what do you think is the right way to grow the economy?
Well, I don't think we have to look much further than 2017 when we cut taxes, when we drove down the cost of investing in this economy. That's what's really critical. Making it affordable, making it profitable to make investments in this economy. Investments mean more jobs. That means starting businesses. That means growing existing businesses, buying factories and plants, expanding those. We did that in 2017. Of course, a lot of those provisions weren't permanent. So Biden can do things like making the R&D making R&D deductibility fully expensable so companies can make R&D investments. There's bipartisan support for doing so. There are things like reducing tariffs that will impact consumers, give them more money in their pockets. That will create economic stimulus. There's a path here that we can take that doesn't involve massive debt. It involves reasonable, intelligent tax reform and nibbling around the edges to lower tax burdens that will grow the economy and create jobs and not saddle future generations with untenable debt.
Mr. Arnold, is there anything else you'd like to tell me or our viewers that I may have forgotten to ask?
Yeah, I may have said this before, but I think this is mind-blowing. We have spent nearly $5.5 trillion fighting this pandemic. That's more than the economies of every country in the world except the United States and China. We have spent so much money to combat this horrible virus and the economic repercussions that have followed. We need to instill some degree of financial restraint and fiscal restraint going forward. Let's hope Republicans and Democrats can come together and work in a bipartisan fashion this time to get the economy going and to start to tackle some of this debt problem so it doesn't saddle future generations with an unfair and untenable burden.
All right, Brandon Arnold, VP at the National Taxpayers Union. Thank you so much for joining us again live this morning on NewsNow from Fox.
My pleasure.
Taking a live look now, everybody, at Capitol Hill. Most of you are going to see a 2-minute commercial break.